Stop paying your bills. Millions already have. I'm not joking, over 50 million Americans are behind on rent, credit cards, utilities, or loans right now. Not because they forgot, but because they gave up. Credit scores are crashing. Delinquencies are surging. Nobody cares anymore. This isn't financial hardship anymore, it's a silent rebellion. Let me show you exactly what's happening and why you're next. Let's stop pretending this is some fringe movement. Right now, millions of Americans have quietly, defiantly, and sometimes accidentally stopped paying their bills. And the wild part? Many of them aren't even ashamed. Some are even proud. Because what do you call it when you pay your rent, pay your phone, pay your student loans, and you're still broke by Tuesday? You call it America in 2025. More than 61% of Americans are now living paycheck to paycheck, according to Lending Club. But here's the kicker. Even 40% of people earning six figures are in the exact same trap. And when people start realizing that doing everything right just leads to zero in the bank and a negative 13 credit score, something breaks. Not mentally, systemically. Because here's what's happening behind the scenes. The number of seriously delinquent credit card accounts has skyrocketed by 50% year over year. That's not normal. That's collapse level. And it's not just cards. Auto loans? Same deal. Student loans? Don't even get me started. More than 1 in 4 borrowers missed their first payment after the COVID freeze ended. Why? Because they can't afford it, and they don't believe the system deserves it. You think you're the only one dodging those final notice envelopes and unknown 1-800 calls? You're not. A movement is building, and it's made of people who used to care, and just don't anymore. Because the truth is, fear of debt only works when people have something left to lose. But when your fridge is empty and your rent's a week late, protect your credit score. Sounds like a joke. And here's the twist that nobody talks about. When enough people stop paying, the system starts bending to you. You get settlement offers. You get reduced balances. You get collection calls that sound suspiciously polite. Because creditors know they're not in control anymore. You are. So if you're sitting there wondering if you're broken for falling behind, nah, you're just early. Welcome to the quiet rebellion. Americans aren't really not paying their bills, they're just playing a brutal weekly game of financial triage. Every paycheck becomes a question. Do I eat or do I pay Discover? Do I keep the lights on or do I throw money at Navient? This isn't irresponsibility, it's cold, exhausted strategy. And we've got the data to prove it. A 2025 survey by PIMTES and Lending Club showed 72% of Americans now skip or delay at least one monthly bill intentionally. That's not accidental, that's deliberate. And guess which bills top the ignore list? Credit cards, student loans, and medical debt. Why? Because people have learned the rules of the game. Student loans? No jail time. Credit cards? They'll send letters, maybe call, but nothing gets repoed. Medical bills? Thanks to a 2022 credit scoring update, most unpaid medical debt under $500 doesn't even hit your credit report anymore. People have figured out which bills are bark and which ones bite. And when you're balancing $17 left in your account and 5 bills screaming for attention, guess what? You pay the one with the sharpest teeth, usually the rent, the car, or the power bill. The rest? They get in line. And here's the financial irony that should piss you off. The system punishes you more for paying off debt than for ignoring it. Just ask anyone who paid off a loan and watched their credit score drop because the account closed. It's a trap, and people are waking up to it. Even the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau admitted it. Credit scores aren't built to reflect reality anymore. They reflect obedience, but Americans aren't playing the obedience game. They're playing survival. So when your stomach growls and your phone buzzes with another payment reminder, guess what? You feed the stomach. You silence the phone. And that's not failure. That's strategy. That's how you keep breathing. And if your creditors don't like it, too bad. They're not the ones choosing between bread and broadband. Debt collectors are losing control. The entire collections industry is panicking behind the scenes. They won't say it out loud, but they're getting ghosted by an entire generation. Like entire call centers full of agents, and nobody's picking up. You know why? Because people are tired. They're broke, and they're no longer scared of a phone call from Linda at Midland Credit Management. In fact, Gen Z and millennials are now screening debt collectors the same way we used to screen exes. Silence, block, move on. And it's working. According to TransUnion, the percentage of accounts in collections that are actually being recovered has dropped nearly 30% in the last 5 years. That's huge. They're still sending letters? Sure. They're still calling, but the response rate has collapsed. One industry insider even said in a Bloomberg interview that most collectors today are just talking to voicemails. That's not a business model. That's a funeral. But here's what's even more insane. Many people are watching their credit scores go up while ignoring collection calls. Why? Because newer scoring models like FICO 9 and VantageScore 4.0 ignore old or paid collections. And in some cases, ignore collections entirely if they're medical or settled. So guess what? You stop answering. Your credit heals itself, and suddenly you're getting auto loan pre-approvals with a 670 even though you still owe on a root canal from 2019. It's wild, but it's real, and the debt industry is scrambling. They're trying lawsuits. They're trying wage garnishments. But garnishments take lawyers. And most Americans, they don't stay at the same job long enough to be tracked. Especially not the ones who already stopped caring. It's like whack-a-mole. By the time they find you, you've quit, moved, or changed banks. And the final twist? Debt collectors get tax breaks on your unpaid debt. Yeah, they profit when you default. So next time Linda calls talking about your outstanding balance, just remember she already got paid. And she knows it. You're not losing the game. You're just playing it better. Paying bills is now a luxury behavior, not a moral obligation. Let's break the illusion wide open. Paying bills on time used to be seen as responsible, honorable, even sacred. Now, it's a luxury flex, like wearing designer shoes in a soup line, because what the data shows and what real people are living is that you don't skip your bills because you're irresponsible. You skip them because you're broke, period. The cost of living in 2025 is absolutely unhinged. Rents are up 30% since 2020. Grocery bills, up 25%. Childcare, don't even ask. And wages, barely budged. You know what that creates? A silent shift in behavior where people only pay what lets them survive the week. It's not that folks don't want to be responsible. It's that they've realized being responsible doesn't pay anymore. And when your bank account is gasping for air every 1st and 15th, there's no moral high ground in paying your full credit card bill just to have your balance eaten alive again in 72 hours. Let's not ignore the ugly truth here. Missed payments aren't a sign of failure, they're now the price of existence. And for a growing number of Americans, skipping bills is how you stay alive. In fact, Pew Research found that more than 47% of low-income adults reported skipping at least one utility, rent, or loan payment in the past year due to inflation. That's not anecdotal. That's mass disobedience. It's a quiet national protest. And people are beginning to talk about it like it's normal because it is. TikTok and Reddit are overflowing with strategies. How to ghost a collections agency. What happens if I just stop paying Capital One? And those posts have millions of views. We've moved into a new era where financial literacy isn't about budgeting apps and emergency funds. It's about knowing which bills to strategically starve without going under. And when even doctors are telling you not to pay your hospital bills unless you're being sued, you know the system has eaten itself. Paying all your bills on time is no longer the default, it's a privilege. And pretending otherwise is pure delusion. You want to talk about mass financial apostasy? Let's talk about student loans. Because the whole country is quietly walking away from the altar. For years, we were told this was the sacred debt. You must pay it, or else. But now, people are looking around and saying, or else what exactly? Because the threats don't work anymore, the panic isn't there, and the government knows it. According to the Department of Education's own numbers, more than 40% of borrowers missed their first payment after the federal freeze ended in 2023. That's not a few people forgetting. That's millions saying, no thanks. And let's be real, it's not because they're lazy. It's because they can't, and they won't. Student loan balances have ballooned into cartoon numbers. The average borrower now owes $37,338. But let's not forget the fine print. Over $1.7 trillion in total debt sits on the backs of Americans who were sold a dream and handed a bill. And when you realize your monthly payment won't even touch the principal, that's not a loan, that's a life sentence. People are waking up to the scam. They're enrolling in school again just to defer payments. They're paying $1 every 200 days to keep the default wolves at bay. They're calling their servicers, arranging hardship plans they fully intend to break. And here's the wildest part. Many of them are doing better financially now that they stopped paying. Some saw their credit scores go up once they stopped feeding the bottomless pit. And you know what else? Debt collectors aren't ready. The infrastructure isn't there to chase 20 million defaulters. The IRS doesn't have the staff. The private loan companies don't have the legal firepower. So what we're seeing is a mass financial walkout. And it's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's just millions of Americans choosing to put food on the table instead of sending blood money to a broken system. If student loan repayment were a religion, then this is the Reformation. Nobody fears the wrath of Sally Mae anymore. And the pews are empty. Americans are now using bankruptcy as a middle-class strategy. Filing bankruptcy is no longer a rock-bottom move, it's a middle-class strategy. And that's terrifying. Because for decades, bankruptcy was framed as the nuclear option. The last resort. The thing you did only after your life completely imploded. But now, people with full-time jobs, two-car garages, and decent credit scores are pulling the plug before they drown. Why? Because they've run the numbers, and bankruptcy makes more financial sense than obedience. And let's not sugarcoat this. Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Filings are skyrocketing. In fact, according to the American Bankruptcy Institute, consumer bankruptcy filings are up 18% year over year in 2024. That's not a blip, that's a trend. And it's not just irresponsible people either. It's teachers, nurses, IT workers, folks who did everything right, but still can't escape the quicksand. Because when you're juggling $12,000 in credit card debt, $800 car payments, and a mortgage rate that just spiked to 8%, you start asking real questions. What am I actually protecting? A credit score that still gets you denied for apartments? A reputation nobody's paying attention to? Bankruptcy clears the slate, and people know it. There are subreddits now with 300,000 plus members trading step-by-step guides on how to nuke their debt and walk away clean. They call it a reset, not a failure. And that's exactly what it is. Because you know who uses bankruptcy strategically all the time? Corporations, airlines, banks, real estate developers. They write off billions, restructure, and keep going. But when a single mom with $30,000 in medical bills tries to do it, society calls her a deadbeat. Not anymore. Americans are taking the gloves off. They're using the system like the system uses them. Bankruptcy isn't the end of the road, it's the off-ramp from financial hell. And for millions, it's the smartest choice they've ever made. The credit system is quietly breaking down because people opted out. The credit system only works if people believe in it. And belief is collapsing. Credit scores are a social contract, a promise that if you behave, you'll be rewarded later. But what happens when later never comes? That's where we are right now. Home ownership is out of reach. Interest rates are punitive. Even perfect credit doesn't get you approved anymore without a massive down payment. So millions of Americans are asking the obvious question, why keep playing? And the data shows the consequences. Banks are tightening lending standards not because people are risky, but because people are disengaging. In 2024, major lenders reported a surge in credit invisibility, meaning consumers intentionally stopped using credit products altogether. No cards, no loans, no payments, just cash, debit, and survival. That's catastrophic for a system built on perpetual borrowing. Even worse for lenders, defaults aren't coming from reckless spending, they're coming from necessities. Groceries, utilities, medical care, rent. This isn't lifestyle inflation, it's existence inflation. The Federal Reserve itself admitted that delinquency rates are rising fastest among people who were previously considered prime borrowers. That's the nightmare scenario. When disciplined payers stop paying, the model collapses. And here's the dirty secret. Creditors can't punish everyone. The courts would be overwhelmed. Collections would implode. Wage garnishment becomes meaningless when job hopping is the norm and gig work dominates income streams. The system relies on fear, and fear only works when people have stability to lose. But when stability is already gone, people disengage. They stop opening mail. They stop answering calls. They stop caring. And once belief is gone, compliance follows it right out the door. This is why lenders are quietly lobbying for new scoring models, alternative data, even social-style behavioral tracking. Because the old system, it's failing. And Americans aren't crashing it with protests or riots. They're doing something far more dangerous. They're walking away. Americans aren't falling behind. They're choosing which bills deserve to exist. This is the part that makes policymakers deeply uncomfortable, because it destroys the narrative. Americans aren't confused. They aren't ignorant. They're not bad with money. They're making rational decisions inside an irrational system. When everything costs too much, something has to give, and people are choosing life over ledgers. Surveys now show that over half of U.S. households actively rank bills by consequence severity. That means rent, food, transportation, and internet come first. Everything else fights for scraps. Credit cards? Optional? Medical bills? Negotiable? Student loans? Theoretical. This is no longer avoidance, it's prioritization. People know exactly what happens if they don't pay each bill, and they act accordingly. That's why utilities see partial payments. That's why hospitals see $10 checks. That's why student loan servicers are flooded with hardship requests they can't process fast enough. Americans have learned the pressure points, and once people realize that most consequences are slow, inconsistent, or unenforceable, fear evaporates. Add to that the psychological fatigue, years of inflation, years of emergencies, years of just hold on a little longer. The average adult now carries chronic financial stress levels equivalent to PTSD markers according to the APA. That changes behavior. When you're exhausted, long-term punishment loses power. Immediate survival wins. That's why people will skip a credit card payment without blinking but panic over a grocery bill. And here's the thing nobody wants to admit. This behavior spreads. When people see neighbors, co-workers, friends openly admitting they stopped paying and survived, sometimes even improved, the taboo breaks. Silence disappears. Shame evaporates. Suddenly, not paying becomes normalized. And normalization is the death of compliance. This isn't chaos. It's adaptation. Americans didn't stop paying bills because they wanted to rebel. They stopped because the math stopped working. And once math replaces morality, the system doesn't stand a chance. The real economy doesn't care about your credit score, and people finally noticed. For decades, the credit score has been this mythic number, this badge of financial virtue. Keep it high, they told us, and you'll unlock a better life. Better jobs, better apartments, lower rates. But the truth? That number only matters if the economy is working, and it's not. In 2025, a 740 credit score means almost nothing if your paycheck doesn't cover rent. And Americans have started to notice. They've watched perfect scores get denied mortgages because interest rates are 7.5%. They've seen apartment applications rejected over income, not credit. They've paid off debts, only to watch their score drop because of a closed account. And they've started asking, why are we killing ourselves to please a system that doesn't even reward us anymore? The lie is dead. And in its place, we're watching a mass realization. Credit doesn't buy survival, cash does. And when cash runs out, credit becomes just another illusion. That's why we're seeing people walk away from their obligations with zero hesitation. You can't shame someone over a score when their electricity is about to be cut off. You can't convince someone to pay a $300 minimum on a card when their rent just jumped $400 overnight. The priorities have shifted and creditors lost. In fact, banks are now panicking over a new trend: consumers with good credit who are simply choosing to default. That was unthinkable 10 years ago. Now, it's common, because people have learned the truth. When the system stops delivering, you stop cooperating. And when 9 out of 10 Americans believe we're heading for a full-blown recession, not later, now that number on your credit file starts to look like what it is: A point system in a broken game, nobody's winning. So people are walking away, and they're not whispering anymore. They're making TikToks about it. They're giving tutorials. They're laughing at collection calls. Because in the real world, the credit score doesn't protect you from bankruptcy. It doesn't cover your groceries. It doesn't stop your eviction. And once people understood that, the entire system started cracking at the seams. This isn't a financial crisis anymore, it's a full-blown cultural rebellion. Let's stop calling it a money problem. What we're living through right now isn't just economic collapse, it's cultural rebellion. It's moral detachment. It's millions of Americans finally admitting out loud what they've known deep down for years. This system was never built for them, and they're done pretending. They're not just broke. They're finished with the lie. The lie that working harder will fix it. That paying every bill on time will lead to success. That financial discipline will someday buy them a house, a future, a family vacation. For decades, we've been gaslit into thinking that if you're broke, it's your fault. You spent too much. You didn't plan. You didn't hustle hard enough. But now, when 2 full-time incomes can't afford food, when professionals with degrees are sleeping in their cars, when seniors are skipping medicine to keep the heat on that lie finally broke. And when it broke, something snapped. People stopped paying. Not out of laziness, out of defiance, out of survival, out of clarity. And now it's spreading. The way Occupy Wall Street fizzled out, this movement is catching fire not through protests and signs, but through quiet refusal, through ghosted bills, through empty mailboxes, through unplugged phones. And the system is terrified because this rebellion doesn't march, it vanishes. You can't arrest millions for not paying. You can't repo dignity. You can't threaten people who've already accepted they have nothing left to lose. It's not even about bills anymore, it's about permission. People have stopped waiting for it, stopped asking, stopped apologizing. They're skipping rent, ignoring student loans, laughing at credit scores, and saying no to a system that has done nothing but bleed them dry. What you're seeing right now is the birth of a new American identity, one that doesn't worship debt, doesn't fear creditors, and doesn't bow to the false gods of capitalism. The credit system? The bill collectors? The endless grind of paying for permission to live? It's all crumbling. Because millions of people have already left the building and they're not coming back. You're not broken, the system is. They want you to feel guilty for not paying, but they're the ones who built a game you can't win. Millions have stopped playing and more are joining every day. So if you're drowning, you're not alone. You're just early. Drop a comment if you're done pretending. Subscribe for more truth they don't want you to hear, and share this with someone who needs to know. You're not crazy. You're just awake.